But I think if you've got a genuinely curious mind, which I think I have, and the sort of personality where you can get excited and enthusiastic about lots of different things, that certainly helps. And also some resilience, because it's tough. Journalism is a pretty tough world.
Welcome to What the 40 Pod with me, Rich Rust. It's an enormous privilege to introduce my guest for this episode, Hannah Prevett. Hannah is currently Deputy Editor of the Times Enterprise Network. Having started her career as a tech journalist, Hannah now specialises in writing about entrepreneurship and fast-growth businesses. She's also a regular host of the Times and Sunday Times events, including the Times CEO Summit, as well as being a contributor to Times Radio. Hannah manages all of this whilst also adeptly juggling a busy family life as a mum to 2 young girls. We've known each other a long time, and I couldn't be happier to have her on the show to get into how she intends to navigate her 40s. Hannah, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Hello.
Thank you very much for that very warm introduction, Rich. I'm not sure I would agree with it adeptly, but nonetheless, thanks for having me.
Richly deserved, but is every day a struggle? Just like fighting a zoo, basically?
I wouldn't say it's a struggle, but a juggle, not wishing to rhyme on purpose, is definitely quite the juggling act. But I'm sure we're going to talk about that later.
We will. And remind me when your actual birthday is, and I'll write it down in the background.
So that you can send me a very expensive gift.
Exactly.
It's the 24th of June.
Okay, so you literally have a few weeks to go. So you are looking down the barrel of 40. And how are you spending the next few weeks?
So my job is quite social anyway, so I'm taking most of the opportunities coming my way in the next few weeks to go out and have some drinks, albeit with colleagues or at various kind of work socials, and also with kind of friends outside of that. And actually my 40th birthday trip with my husband, my best friend and her husband, is a couple of weeks before my birthday. We're going away because that fell in between both of our 40th. So yeah, I'm actually celebrating a couple of weeks early.
And do you know what you're doing on that trip?
I do not. So it's a surprise. I know we're definitely leaving the country.
Okay.
And I believe it's probably within a 3-hour flight radius.
So hang on. So you've been told to get your passport ready. So how do you know it's a 3-hour flight? Have you been given some kind of brief? Clearly there's some parameters here in terms of what you've been told.
I set a bit of a brief from the outset and made a few suggestions, such as there had to be some sunshine. I would ideally like to be by a nice beach, need to have great pools, good food. I've become a bit more exacting in my old age, so somewhere quite luxurious. And also neither my best friend nor I particularly love flying. So I don't think we would relish the idea of flying to Fiji and back for a long weekend sort of thing.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's just hope that it isn't, Hannah, we're going to Inverness or the Highlands for the weekends, because that would probably be a marriage ender as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Happy 40th, have a divorce. I can't imagine that that's on the cards, but who knows, Rich? Who knows?
Who knows? And it's about the people, right? It doesn't matter where you go. Ultimately, it doesn't matter where you go. I'm sure wherever you're going will be wonderful.
I'm afraid I'd have to disagree with you there. As I said, as I've become older, I've become a bit more exacting and know what I like in life. And I would like to go somewhere really lovely where people wait on me hand and foot and bring me food and drinks at my every whim.
Fair enough. I think it's good to know what you like as well. Then at least you know you're going to enjoy it. And how are you feeling in general about turning 40? Is it a big thing for you or not?
Do you know what? It is and it isn't. So I actually remember my dad's 40th really clearly. And it's funny, actually, because it was at the house where they still live on Mersey Island in Essex, which I know you're familiar with. And they had this party, and my Auntie Pat made my dad. She used to make these amazing cakes. It was in the shape of a computer, and this was, quite some time ago when computers were quite large. And my parents were all dancing in the lounge, and they were doing that "Oops, Upside Your Head" song where they all between each other's legs and tap the floor and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I thought it was all really bizarre, and also just how old are they? 40 is so ancient. That's my kind of overarching memory of my parents turning 40. But now, as you put it, staring down the barrel of turning 40 myself, I really don't feel like that's about it at all. And in fact, of course, it's a milestone, but actually, because I suppose I'm in such a good place in terms of my career, my social life, at home with the family, with 2 amazing kids.
Yeah.
I couldn't be happier, really. I suppose we'd all like more seniority, more money, more status, a bigger house, a couple of ponies for the back garden.
Yeah.
But all in good time, right?
All in good time. I think 41's the year for the ponies, if I'm being honest. You can't rush it.
I suspect it might be a bit longer than that. And in fact, I was at a conference just earlier this week put on by the Chartered Management Institute. And one of the sessions towards the end of the day was thinking about how we have this fourth quarter of our lives that we didn't have 100 years ago.
Yeah.
When we lived for 30 years less, and just kind of asking the audience to think about what they would do with their additional 30 years.
Yeah.
And according to her description, I'm only in the second quarter of my life, which makes me feel quite positive because that takes you up to kind of 50. And then just actually there's time. I think one of the things when I was a bit younger, particularly after having my first daughter, was that I felt like I was in a real hurry. I wanted another job and, you know, a better job, more money, etc. I felt like I was in a hurry to do everything. But actually, one of the lessons coming through from this keynote I watched earlier this week was that it's okay to take your time. There's still plenty of time.
But somebody else said something similar to me the other day. She was like, yeah, I summited Everest when I was 40. And I was like, okay, that's quite an achievement. But she talked about the fact that it kind of gave her this sense of, she got to 40, she still felt well, she still felt healthy. And she was like, all I got a sense of was how much time I have to do so many epic things. And I was like, that's a really good outlook. And you kind of feel energized by that. But I agree with you in terms of like, when I think about my parents, I'm like, 40-year-olds when we were young used to look so old. And I'm like, I really hope I don't look like that to people who are 20 now. I must do. You maybe not.
I'm often interviewing people for the paper by Zoom.
Yeah.
And somebody said to me the other day, I hope I look as good as you when... It wasn't when I get to your age, but it was when I've got kids. So it's a kind of double-edged sword of like, fuck, you're old, but you wear it pretty well. So yeah, but I do feel like maybe 40-year-olds are younger than they used to be. And also there's such a momentum around the wellness thing and taking care of ourselves. I feel like perhaps I take better care of myself, apart from maybe some of the drinking. And my parents maybe did at the same age. And in terms of physical fitness, I run quite a lot now. So in terms of kind of cardio fitness, I'm probably the fittest I've ever been. So that's quite a nice place to be in as you turn 40 as well, because I think getting fit now is really important because it's kind of the building blocks for as you get older. And
I think you're right. You can kind of baseline yourself almost versus what your parents did or didn't do and kind of go, yeah, at this point they were smoking or they were not being healthy, and see where they're at.
Although in terms of longevity, Rich, I think you've kind of won the lottery in terms of genes there, because how old do people tend to live in your family?
Yeah, that's true. I am quite lucky. Two of my grandparents, mid-90s. The one I have left is now 95. And I saw her a few weeks ago when I was back, and she was frustrated because she couldn't get a car out of the garage. And I was like, should you be driving? Really? But it's amazing. Honestly, it's amazing. But thinking about kind of the career side of it, and you touched on this, and again, this is a kind of weird one for me, like 40 is kind of mid-career or approaching mid-career, which is probably the most weird out kind of feeling I've had. But as you said, you know, you're in a good place in your career, 20 years into a journalism career, clearly you could continue being a journalist for decades. So what kind of motivates you and keeps you interested? And how do you kind of reflect on that and what you decide to do next? What are your kind of triggers for that?
I suppose I'm very lucky in that I get to do lots of different things, right?
Yeah.
So whilst I write, my day job is writing for the Times and the Sunday Times about entrepreneurs, which in itself is absolutely fascinating.
Amazing.
And I meet such a broad range of people. One day I could be writing about packaging and cardboard boxes. Believe it or not, I got really into cardboard boxes, not literally.
Oh, I can believe it.
And I have to explain a little bit, but it was about how kind of small businesses couldn't get hold of the packaging they needed. And obviously that has a huge knock-on impact. If they can't get the packaging, they can't send out the parcels and they can't make any money. But from cardboard boxes to the next day, you know, interviewing somebody today about gut health and talking about the latest innovations in health tech and these businesses taking pressure off the NHS, like some really important stuff. I wrote about the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, earlier this week, and her plans, how she'd like to close the gender pay gap and important issues around childcare and how that can help kind of level things up for women in the workplace. So just really fascinating stuff in the day job, which I absolutely love. But I also get to do a variety of other stuff. So I host lots of events on the side. So that can be emceeing the whole thing. It can be on stage interviews. And that's fascinating. Through that, I've met our Prime Minister through my hosting work at the Times. And in fact, our big flagship event, the CEO Summit, is 2 days before my birthday. So in a couple of weeks' time. And it's always my biggest event of the year. No pressure, Hannah. But on that subject, like I've been writing for a really long time.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that you don't continue to improve, and you definitely do. Even reading some of my stuff from 10 years ago, I sort of cringe because I know I could do it better now. But also the speaking side of things. And I recently also recorded a podcast series for the first ever time. And I'm no kind of voice expert like you, Rich. It was a whole new thing for me. And I just love that thing of learning new skills.
Yeah.
So you can teach an old dog new tricks. And particularly around kind of the public speaking side of things, I was absolutely terrified of public speaking, and it's something I bang on about quite a lot because, especially as a woman, lots of female friends will often say to me, I couldn't do what you do. Like, I'll send them a picture of a room that I'm about to host and they're like,
Yeah.
never do that. And I'm like, you absolutely can. And I would have had the same gut reaction a few years ago too. And you only get better at it by doing it and kind of conquering those fears or learning to deal with them in whichever way you choose to. But I think it's really important that people know anybody genuinely can do it. And obviously it's hilarious because you and I used to do drama class together.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that stuff occasionally because, first of all, because it doesn't feel like that long ago, frankly. And then you go, oh, actually, it was 20-something years ago, which is ridiculous. But I think you make a really interesting point about kind of expanding your muscle memory in certain areas. And to your point on fear and kind of overcoming things, it's certainly a kind of sense of you just got to find the right mindset that allows you to kind of take small steps to get where you want to get.
And also getting help if you need to and if you want to. So I was very lucky when I started doing more speaking for the publishers that I work for. They were very happy to pay for some public speaking coaching for me.
Yeah.
And I'd met a coach years before and had a kind of couple of one-off sessions with her back then.
Right.
And then she did a more kind of structured coaching program with me a couple of years ago. It was during COVID, actually, and I was getting asked to host more and more stuff.
Yeah.
It was exactly what you said about the mindset through which you approach things.
Yeah.
And I realised that I had this particular almost like obsession with who was in the room. So it wasn't even necessarily about the size of the audience, it was who the audience was.
Yeah.
So for example, I'm generally much more nervous if there's journalists in the room because I respect their views so much, and they can be a pretty skeptical, cynical bunch. And the last thing I would want is for them to be like, oh God, that was a stupid question, or why hasn't she thought to ask him or her this question? So I realised I needed to stop thinking about that and just reframe my thinking to realise that most of the time people generally want you to do well.
Yeah.
There's not many instances where people are sitting in the room being like, oh, I can't wait to watch Hannah fuck this up.
That's so true. But I think you make a good point. Like that kind of professional validation from your peers is something that I'm really aware of that as well. I think that's a very good point, which is you could probably have a room of a couple of thousand people, but if the front row is prominent journalists who you know and respect, then of course that's going to throw you. So what kind of techniques did she give you to kind of overcome that?
Well, I guess the first step is just being aware of it, isn't
Yeah.
it? And just learning to park it, I guess, put it to one side and be like, they're just people too, or,
Yeah.
you know, it's absolutely fine. And also it's the same thing it's always been, is doing my research. So knowing my subject inside out, and the same with interviewees. Like I will work 10 times harder than many people to prepare for an event, because the best way for me to conquer fears is to have prepared for every eventuality, have 10 times more questions than I'm ever going to need to ask them. Just being prepared for anything. You always get a sense of whether or not you've nailed something, both by the kind of response in the room, like people are really engaged with what's going on rather than being on their phones.
Yeah.
Also, one of the most important things, her name is Kim Barnes, actually, this coach I worked with. One of the most important things that Kim taught me was about how to deal with any problems that might arise. Because I think that was another thing. Always thinking, if this goes wrong, would I be able to deal with it? And I was hosting a fully virtual half-day summit during COVID. So it was from home with this sort of setup. And it's quite complicated, actually, hosting a big event like this. Like one panel or like a short event is fine, because there were lots of different sections to it. And there was a green room, which looked very much like the non-green room. So you weren't quite sure when you were live, when you weren't live. And basically, I skipped ahead a bit in my script. So I had missed a whole chunk, and I introduced the next guest and thanked somebody who hadn't quite spoken yet. And
Nice.
It was a big lesson for me about being really present in what I was doing, because I was also kind of chatting to the next speakers in the green room, and that I'd just taken my eye off the ball. And so what that taught me was that at the next thing I did, I had to just make sure I was really present in the here and now and not get distracted. And also the other big thing it taught me is that nobody died, right? Like it was absolutely fine. A really softly spoken production guy appeared in my ear and was like, "Oh, Hannah, I think you might have skipped forward in the script. Actually, you need to do this."
Yeah.
So I just took a breath and I said, "Oh, technical issue on my end. We're actually doing this now." And it was absolutely fine. Most people didn't even notice. The sponsors didn't notice. They were delighted with everything. So big moral of the story is nobody died. Everyone survived. And you can deal with these kind of curveballs that might have once seemed like a disaster.
Yeah. And it gives you great experience the next time because you're just prepared for it. You just have that inbuilt response mechanism for when stuff maybe does go that way. And you've just got that knowledge base and that kind of muscle memory of how to respond to things. So follow-up question on that. So we're talking careers. I mean, you have an epic career in the eyes of many, I think. When did you decide to get into journalism and how did that come about?
So I had wanted to be a writer from a really young age, apart from a brief flirtation with wanting to be an actress. But as we both
Which you were exceptional at, obviously.
I knew I was never going to make it past beyond Hollyoaks, kind of standard of acting.
I love the fact that is your low bar. You're like, that wouldn't have been good enough for me. It was Hollywood or nothing, darling. And I just went, no, I'm not going to do Hollyoaks. Brilliant.
Yeah, I just knew I wasn't good enough to be great and to make it to the top. But anyway, so apart from a brief moment of that, I just pretty much always wanted to be a writer. I was always really good at English. It was always my strongest subject at school and then at college. And then I studied it at university. So I went to Goldsmiths and did media and English literature with a specialism in journalism in the final year.
Right.
I consider myself quite lucky, really, because there's lots of people who obviously spend a long time trying to figure out what it is they want to do. Whereas I was quite single-minded, like, I want to do this, so I will.
Yeah.
And I applied for an editorial assistant job before I'd even finished my degree. And to my shock and amazement, I got it. But then I was sort of juggling university and my dissertation and everything, and this quite full-on job on a tech magazine for a few months. But it was great. I learned so much. It was in a really complicated subject area. So the magazine's still going. It's called Information Age.
Yeah.
But it was a trade tech title and it was really complex stuff, like data servers. And I went to visit data centres. One memorably was on the roof of Harrods in Knightsbridge. But I also got to travel loads. So I was still living in my student house and all my friends were eating, like 2-day-old pizza still straight from the box. And I was flying business class to Vegas,
Nice.
It was pretty cool. And you all know, right, the tech circuit is quite cool. I don't know if they deliberately do it because so much of it is really quite boring.
Absolutely.
So if they make conferences in quite cool, glamorous locations, it makes the tech geeks feel cool for a second.
It's so true. You make an interesting point around not necessarily being that technical, but clearly you understood the business of tech and you were able to write about it. And I guess this is a general question, but when you're faced with kind of something that is so technical and specific from a subject matter, how do you tackle that as a journalist? What's your kind of route into it?
It almost comes back to what I was saying about research and preparation with public speaking. Just being prepared to really spare the time to drill down into something and making sure you understand it, because I don't think I probably did that originally, and it became very clear that I didn't know what I was talking about. So I knew that I had to take really complex things and break them down and then explain them in a way that I would understand. So it was trying to do a lot of that, and I think that stood me in really good stead, because being perfectly frank, what 21, 22-year-old woman wants to go and start writing about data servers? Like, not many. I used to think I wanted to be like a fashion and women's issues writer. Never thought for the life of me I would go into tech and business. But I actually really enjoyed the feeling of mastering something and turning it around and making it interesting for people like me who didn't necessarily have that super technical background, but it could be deep enough so that the people who do also find it interesting. So it's quite a big challenge, but I think once you've nailed that, you can probably write about anything. Yeah.
Well, clearly that's true, because you now have a role with a national newspaper. You get to choose kind of, I guess, who you talk to a degree. You get to interview amazing people. So how do you go from that? How do you go from being a fairly specialist tech journalist into doing what you're doing now? And what kind of decisions do you get to make as part of that?
So the thing that became really clear to me quite early on was that it wasn't necessarily the technology itself I was really interested in. It's the transformational impact it could have on businesses. So I realised that I wanted to go more down the kind of business route. And also I was more interested in the startup world than the kind of incumbents. So that all kind of naturally came together. I went to work for a magazine called Growing Business. And that's when I started writing about entrepreneurs for the first time. And I just absolutely loved it. And I think one of the things is you can't help but be inspired by these people. Their energy is just really infectious in a way, I guess. So I just loved doing that. Worked there for a while. My career was a bit wobbly for a while as I navigated the various recessions and job booms and busts. I got made redundant a couple of times and ended up back in very specialist tech titles. And then I guess a big turning point was writing for Management Today, which is still a really well-respected title, but like lots of print titles, has had its troubles in terms of being feasible financially. And whilst I was there, a former assistant business editor of the Sunday Times, who I'd met at a party actually, called Andrew Lynch, he asked me if I was able to write as a freelancer. And I started sporadically writing this column for the Sunday Times called How I Made It, which is the flagship entrepreneur profile that runs every Sunday. And in a kind of very virtuous circle, I now edit that column. So I run that column. I write it most weeks, but I also commission it. And I sort of own that, if you like. I've been asked to curate and do a book on the same subjects. Probably won't have time, but it's just this amazing kind of symmetry how I've ended up looking after it. And I love it. I love How I Made It. It's just the most fantastic column. And the ones that always inspire readers the most are the ones where the founder kind of came from nothing and then has built something really amazing and, you know, created wealth, frankly, along the way.
From nothing, effectively.
Exactly, really overcome kind of adversity. So they're my favourite stories to write about. So I got lucky, I met the right people, I worked really hard, and just, I think as well, genuine passion for what you do. I've had some shit jobs along the way. You know, I wrote about shopping centre car parks for a while.
Every shopping centre needs a car park, so... You know.
Well, and also there's all kinds of things. Again, if you're a bit of a geek and you can get interested in literally anything, like the services of car parks, because there's lots of kids in car parks. If they fall over, they're sort of rubbery, right? So that kids don't get injured.
That is genuinely the most insightful thing I've heard probably this week. Thank you for that. I'm going to talk about that over dinner. That's awesome.
But I think if you've got a genuinely like curious mind, which I think I have, and the sort of personality where you can get excited and enthusiastic about lots of different things, that certainly helps. And also some resilience, because it's tough. Journalism is a pretty tough world, and there's been a degree of sexism as well throughout my career. And it's still around, not to the same extent, but I used to get a lot of inappropriate comments and questions during interviews, particularly when I was in my mid-20s. And it doesn't happen so much anymore. I like to think, Rich, it's not because I'm about to turn 40 and I look like an ogre, but probably because I'm a bit more accomplished, and they're a bit scared now because of Me Too and the like, which they should be, because it's not an appropriate way to behave. But navigating that has also been a journey.
And so in terms of kind of how that manifests itself, you kind of mean that basically you get asked to do things because people want to speak to you or they're interested, or they just talk to you inappropriately. How does that kind of play out?
Well, exactly that. So I would be interviewing people. I remember one interview, I was recording the interview in my bag, actually, which I think is probably breaking some kind of rule. I should have told him I was recording. But I remember this was a long time ago, and we were sitting in a hotel lobby and I was interviewing him about a data centre. There's definitely a theme here. And he said, "Oh, do you mind if I lean over your long legs to get to my bag?" You know, just let him continue the interview. And then at the end, he asked me out on a date. That happened quite a lot, that men would ask me out. And I was always very frustrated because I thought the interview had gone really well and that they respected me professionally. And then at the end, they would express intentions that weren't entirely professional, and I would feel it undermined the conversation we'd just had, and it must be my fault in some way rather than the fault being with them.
It removes a level of professional credibility, which is a horrible thing to do to anyone in any environment.
This lit a fire in my belly because I could see men would relax when they saw they had me interviewing them. So I remember one very clear example, a very senior man from a bank, and he was sitting at a big board table flanked by his PR advisors. And I walked in and I swear you could see him visibly like exhale, like, oh, thank goodness they sent the secretary. Do you know what I mean?
I'm going to
like
get an
he
easy
just
ride, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. And let's just say he did not get an easy ride.
Good.
And he soon changed his preconceived ideas about what it meant to be interviewed by a 25-year-old blonde woman from Essex.
Which goes back to your point around preparation and walking with those scenarios ready. It makes a lot of sense. So look, now you get to talk to these kind of interesting entrepreneurs. How do you choose, or do you go out and purposely kind of find interesting examples?
It's a bit of both. So there's lots of inbound email.
Yeah.
So obviously when you work for titles like the Times and the Sunday Times, they're internationally recognised brands. Everybody knows who they are. Lots of PR people want to get their clients into the pages or the virtual pages of the newspapers. So we do get lots of really good inbound pitches. We also get lots of really terrible ones.
I can imagine,
and completely irrelevant ones. So there's lots of inbound stuff. There's also... I like to get out to events. I've been to a couple of things this week, a couple of conferences. I'll see people out and about.
Yeah.
One of the best feelings is when you uncover a story that hasn't been told before, because often the entrepreneurs who are pitched to you are ones that have been around the block a few times, to be perfectly frank. So you can read something about them on almost any other website. So actually discovering somebody or writing a story that's not often told is much more gratifying. And sometimes I might find those through lists. So JP Morgan does a great one, top 200 women-powered businesses, or words to that effect. And I will spend several hours scrolling through and seeing who's on the list, and then kind of doing a bit of my own desk research. And that can be a really good way of uncovering less well-known stories.
Nice.
And the same with other kind of, but credible awards.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of scourge rewards things now, which are just basically made up, and people giving awards to their mates. I see it all the time.
I hate that.
Exactly. And they're terrible. Not into that at all, but credible ones for sure. And we also run now the Sunday Times 100, it's in our second year, and it's a list of the 100 fastest growing companies in the UK. And just by doing that as well, that gives us an amazing resource.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I'm hosting the awards again this October. That was just an incredible moment last year. I was standing in the atrium of the British Museum, and, there's that incredible ceiling. And it's just one of the most incredible buildings in London. And I was hosting the dinner for 300 people stood on that stage. And it's slightly strange kind of audio. It's very echoey. So you have to speak, in this kind of very slow, slightly kind of grand way so that everyone can hear.
Yeah.
And I was standing at the back of that room like, holy shit, I cannot believe I'm about to host in this incredible room, but then getting on and nailing it.
I can imagine that's a whole different sense of adrenaline and excitement, and that's got to be a highlight. Where's the event this year? Same place or somewhere else?
It's at the same place, yeah. And it's funny because sometimes, particularly for Times events, I think they probably just assume I'm on board to do it again. And I host lots of the high profile ones, which I do love and I am thrilled, but it's never really a question. So I'm just like, so guys, we were talking about the event for this year, and I was like, am I hosting it? And well, yeah. And I'm like, well, at some point it would be really great if somebody would ask or let me know, because I don't want to assume to start thinking about my outfit.
Yeah, and if you need a table filler, I'm always available to be in the audience. You've loads going on. You're interviewing entrepreneurs, you're hosting events, you're doing podcasts, you're emceeing, and then you have a busy family life as well. How do you find the balance? First of all, do you have a balance, and do you think a balance is important? And then how do you manage all of those different elements of your life?
It is really difficult. I just think that people who talk about having it all, and this is again something I heard earlier this week, you can have it all, but maybe at slightly different times.
Yeah.
So when the kids were babies, it just was really tricky to function and be performing at your best at all times when you weren't having any sleep, for example. My husband also works for the paper, and he works really funny shift times. So it used to be that he was on lates and I was on earlies, and then that sort of worked. But with the increasing kind of digitization of the newsrooms, shifts sort of move around.
Yeah.
So it's a constant kind of jigsaw puzzle of childcare. We've got 2 kids aged 3 and 6.
Yeah.
And I've worked out we've got 6 different childcare providers.
Wow. You need ChatGPT to write you an algorithm for how you manage that. That's crazy.
Well, it's all in my head, right? And this is the thing. So the other day I was in the office and I was just really busy. And my husband messages me out asking where Rose, our eldest, is, where she needs picking up from tonight. And I told him the wrong place.
Right.
And I knew where she was. I'd just sort of forgotten what day it was. And also I was thinking, hang on a second, it's been the same deal, darling, for 18 months. I mean, you should know where she is by now on a Tuesday. But yeah, it's incredibly complex. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
We spend probably about £2,000 a month on childcare at the moment. And that's with the 60 hours free from the government for the 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And I genuinely feel that actually in the kind of middle part of your career, and, you know, journalists don't earn huge amounts of money. It's not like we could afford really a nanny. So I feel like that's probably where it's trickiest, because at the other end, you know, you've got people who work part-time to fit around the kids so they don't need so much paid childcare. And at the top end, you've got these really high-flying career women who work much longer hours than I do, but they also have lots of help. They can afford to pay for nannies and the private schools and all of the other bells and whistles.
But then also maybe miss out on loads of other things as well as a result. So there's just the trade-offs are brutal in whichever direction you put it in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the parental guilt is there. You know, sometimes my daughter asks why I don't pick her up from school, why she has to go to after-school clubs and all that kind of stuff. But I think particularly as a mum of girls, I think it's really important they have strong female role models. Both my girls know that mummy works just as hard as dad.
Yeah.
I'm away sometimes with my work, the paper, but also when I'm hosting events, I often have to stay away for a couple of days if I'm hosting a conference. But they know it's because mummy works really hard too, and that we both work really hard so they can have a nice life and we can go on holidays and do nice things together. So I think, for me, it's really important they have that role model and they know that things are really equal, both at home and at work.
That's a very good point. I mean, that kind of equitable share of you both do things. I mean, that's something that I've been very conscious of this year. I mean, my wife is, as you know, has just finished filming like a 16-week block on this show. She talked about mum guilt this time in a way that she never has before. And that's partly because, you know, our eldest is really starting to ask questions about where's mummy today, where's daddy, and you become so aware of it. We had a situation a few weeks ago where both of us forgot that Reuben needed picking up and left him at school, and the school were unimpressed. It's the first time it's ever happened. And we have, a bit like you, not to the same degree, but we have somebody who kind of helped us pick up and drop off, and we just forgot. So that did not go down well. But then you kind of go...
Yeah, but these things happen. We talk about the juggle and sometimes the ball gets dropped. And
it does.
I think it's also not being too hard on yourself when that does happen, because we're all ultimately trying our best.
Absolutely. And the trauma's good for the kids, right? A little bit of trauma occasionally. It'll be good for them in later life. They need to learn these experiences to a degree.
Exactly.
As long as they're safe.
Character building.
Yeah, exactly. Right, I'm going to ask you a couple of quick fires, Han. So first of all, what are you most excited about for the next decade, now that you are turning 40 in a few weeks' time?
So I think just really kind of turbocharging my career now. Like I said, the last sort of decade, I got married 8 years ago. So much of the last 8 years, so I got married and I had 3 wedding events because I married into an Indian family. So we had a Hindu wedding and a Hindu engagement ceremony anyway. So we had loads of wedding events, and then we had 2 kids in quite quick succession. So even though I've also worked hard and my career's progressed nicely during that time, and I'm very lucky for all the opportunities I've had, I think this next decade, as we come out of the kind of baby years, is the time to kind of knuckle down and do more of what I do and do it better, basically.
There's something quite exciting about that as well, I guess, because you can kind of go, I'm just going to ease into that now. And in theory, every year that goes by with the family and all the things we just talked about should become slightly easier, right? As they get a bit older. In theory, it should.
Yeah, from what I hear, the challenges remain, but they're just slightly different. Yeah. So I'm not kidding myself, it's going to suddenly be perfect. But I think in terms of some of the time pressures, definitely hoping the sleepless nights subside over the next decade, and that I'll be having to drag them out of bed rather than them dragging me out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well,
we'll pick that one up again when I do the What the 50 pod. So park that one. So this one's a kind of a flippant one, but a serious one. If you bumped into your 30-year-old self on the street, what advice would you give her if you saw 30-year-old Hannah walking down the road?
Gosh, it's hard, isn't it? Because if it was 20-year-old Hannah, I would probably say work as hard as you can to get as far ahead in your career as you can before you have kids. I think that's really important. But then at 30, when I was about to do all of that, probably say, relax, it will all be fine.
Yeah.
Because like I say, I put all this pressure on myself, particularly just after I had Rose. I remember going back literally my first day after maternity leave ended and asking my boss like when I was going to get a promotion and when I was going to get my next pay rise, etc. I was so hungry, which is really good to be really ambitious, but I did feel a lot of internal pressure. And the advice I have given friends in similar circumstances is just go back, just kind of settle back into it and see how it goes, like take it day by day, which is generally my approach to most things these days. I'm a lot more relaxed, let things wash over me and don't sweat the small stuff, basically.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I think sometimes that comes with experience as well, doesn't it? And you just realise that things happen when they're meant to happen often, and you need to just kind of not rush it. Where do you get your inspiration? Because particularly as somebody who you have to write all the time, you're talking to kind of interesting people who come from a broad range of backgrounds, but how do you stay current? What are your kind of source of inspiration? Is it TED Talks, podcasts, books? What do you like?
What do I like? I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but to be perfectly honest, I put them on to go to sleep. So maybe not those. Sure. I use it more of a way to switch off.
Yeah.
I don't read as much as I should do. I would say I take more inspiration actually from the world around me. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true. So from the people I meet every day who I'm interviewing, I'm hugely inspired by almost all of them. By my colleagues, other like fantastic journalists. I'm privileged to work with an amazing team of writers and editors on both papers.
Yeah.
I've had in particular one really close mentor on the paper, James Hurley. He's an amazing journalist and has just always made time for me and helped me develop. And other kind of colleagues in the same space who work for different titles who give up their time to help you kind of grow and develop. My friends, you know, I draw inspiration from them. I've got friends going through a lot at the moment with her health and I just see how she deals with everything. And that puts it into context for me when I'm stressing about a deadline or, you know, a piece I'm agonizing over. I'm like, my friend is fighting this incredible battle against this awful disease. And I just think if she can deal with that, I can deal with my deadline. You know, just I think that's really useful for perspective.
Yeah.
And last but not least, my family, my kids. My parents are so proud of me. Just like makes my heart swell with love for them. They're just so sweet how they talk about me. They're always kind of glowing when they talk about my job.
Amazing.
It's just so lovely. And it's true of my wider family. You know, I've got 2 brothers as well.
Yeah.
And my husband similarly. And my girls, you know, I just think they are so amazing. And you'll know, Rich, when you see things through the eyes of children, seeing things for the first time.
Yeah.
It is really inspiring and just wanting to be the best mum and the best friend and the best role model to them.
Yeah.
That inspires me every day.
Brilliant. And it just frames things so differently, doesn't it? And it's so important. But yeah, it's wonderful. I hear you on that. Okay, thank you so much. What's your guiltiest pleasure? When you go on your 40th trip, what's the thing you're going to do that's going to make you happiest but you may not want to tell everyone about? Keep it clean, please.
I do have an incredibly sweet tooth and I do drink too much wine. Like I love wine of all kinds, of all colours, like good wine. I'm pretty picky about it now, but yeah, I mean, it's not very exciting, but wine, good company, and I shop quite a lot. And I say that it's really important, particularly because I'm doing conferences and stuff, that I'm dressed in a really nice way. So I do spend quite a lot of money on.
I think that's completely reasonable rationale, to be honest. I think that's entirely fair enough.
And skincare and makeup, Rich. And again, approaching 40, got to make the best of this, right?
I hear you.
I think it's time to invest in good products.
Can I just say, I got an amazing Clarence and Men set for my 40th, and it's probably one of the things I was happiest about for my birthday. So you mentioned earlier that you got to meet Rishi Sunak. How did that come about and what happened?
So I'm not sure that I should be saying this on a publicly available podcast.
Oh, please do.
That's never stopped me before, to be honest. So I was hosting the CEO Summit perhaps for the second time a couple of years ago, and Rishi was then the Chancellor, and I wasn't interviewing him on stage. That was being handled by somebody much more familiar with the affairs of the Treasury. Anyway, so I had introduced him onto the stage and it was a big moment for me. Everyone was watching. The cameras were rolling. It was being streamed. I knew it was very likely that some of our very famous, prominent members of News Corps were watching. Anyway, that all went absolutely fine. Came off stage and behind the set, I was being de-mic'd.
Yeah.
And as other women who do public speaking will know, often your battery packs are like in your underwear somewhere, basically, because they can't be visible when you're on stage.
Yeah.
And it's not always very discreet. They just kind of whip them out where they need to if they need to change batteries. So I was stood backstage and they'd unzipped the whole of the back of my dress, like literally to the waistband.
Right.
So I was just sort of holding it on.
Yeah.
And Rishi came past with his entourage.
Yeah.
And he's a very polite, charming man.
Yeah.
He realised he had forgotten to say goodbye to me. So he backtracked. He came back to thank me and to say goodbye.
Brilliant.
And little did he know, if I'd moved an inch, the whole of my dress would have fallen off.
Amazing.
In front of the future Prime Minister. So I was just terrified. I just stood there kind of stock still, just holding everything and hoping he wouldn't notice that I was naked from behind.
Incredible. Brilliant. Well, he probably has remembered that. That's a wonderful story. I love it.
Well, he didn't know, Rich. He didn't know. He could only see me from the front where I looked perfectly normal.
Well, you can tell him next time you see him, which I'm sure will happen. Look, thank you so much, Hannah.
It could happen.
It will happen. It will happen. Thank you. This has been awesome.